If your image looks colorful but still kind of wrong, this video is for you. When I first started color grading, I thought the answer was more color, more saturation, more plugins, better LUTs. But somehow the image never felt finished. And it turns out the problem wasn't the tools. I was simply making the same mistakes most beginners make. In this video, we're going to break down the most common color grading mistakes beginners run into, and more importantly, how to fix them by understanding what actually makes an image work. Before we talk about style or looks, let's talk about image stability. Most beginners, and this includes my early work, go straight for the final look. We load the footage into Resolve and immediately start touching everything. Primary wheels, log wheels, curves, contrast, white balance, all at once. No system, no order. Every shot gets treated differently. And the result usually looks like this: inconsistent exposure, jarring colors, noisy or artifacted image. But do you know what would actually change everything? The foundation. A good grade is built on a clean canvas. That means separating correction from interpretation. Before thinking about mood or color, we make sure exposure is stable, meaning highlights behave like highlights, midtones feel grounded, shadows stay controlled. Nothing is unintentionally clipped or crushed. Once luminance is stable, chroma comes next. Removing unintended color casts and correcting white balance so the image is technically neutral. Only after that, we introduce contrast to anchor the image in reality. Sometimes this stage also includes light technical fixes, like masking to rebalance lighting ratios. But the goal stays the same: a clean, readable image. This stage is called color correction, and it's the part most beginners skip. Color grading is an interpretation of an image. A solid correction stage becomes your safety net. If creative choices later don't work, you don't start over. You fall back to a reliable base. That's when grading stops feeling random. Another common complaint among beginners is, my image looks clean, but it still doesn't look cinematic. What that usually means is, it doesn't feel intentional. So what do beginners do next? We chase color, we boost saturation, shift hues, warm midtones, cool shadows for separation. And yes, the colors definitely get louder, but the image still doesn't feel nuanced. This is where many of us have to fundamentally change how we think about grading. Because the problem was never color. The problem was light. Color corresponds to luminance. In other words, luminance shapes how color feels. You see, many beginners assume saturation creates depth. It doesn't. Contrast does. Contrast gives color weight. It decides which colors matter and which ones fade into the background. Once we start shaping lights first, deciding where the eye should go and where the image should breathe, color becomes surprisingly easy. Small adjustments feel intentional instead of desperate. Grading stops feeling like trial and error. This isn't about fixing mistakes. This is about understanding that light carries the emotional weight, and color follows. And then here comes a common dangerous trap for beginners. We've all seen it. A demo video where someone slaps on a LUT or turns a few plugin dials. And boom, suddenly the image looks high-end. So we collect more LUTs, more plugins, and sometimes it works on one shot. Then we switch to another piece of footage and the look falls apart. It doesn't transfer, it doesn't scale, the image suddenly feels compressed, overcolored, or broken, and we conclude LUTs and plugins don't work. But the problem isn't the tools, the problem is how we use them. They're shortcuts, presets that convert specific input values into fixed output values, regardless of what the scene actually looks like. So let's say your footage is overexposed and you apply a LUT designed for normal exposure. It's going to crush your shadows, clip your highlights, and destroy information you cannot recover later. So what's the right way to use them? Well, first, correction always comes before creativity, which brings us right back to the foundation we talked about earlier. Before any LUT, before any plugin, the image needs a clean base, proper exposure, neutral white balance, stable contrast. Yes, some plugins include correction controls, and yes, experienced colorists often blend steps together. But for beginners, separating correction from creative work gives you control, clarity, and consistency. And here's the important part. You don't actually need LUTs or plugins to create good color. Using nothing but curves and wheels, you can arrive at very similar results with more flexibility and a deeper understanding of what's actually happening. LUTs and plugins become optional, interchangeable. And later on, when you apply LUTs and plugins, you know exactly why they work and when they don't. So in this section, we're going to come up with a simple framework that you can apply to in every project. You see, color grading isn't about grading a single frame, it's about grading a sequence so everything belongs together. That's why we need a repeatable workflow, a system that gives consistency and confidence. Let me show you my repeatable workflow as an example, not as a rule, but as a framework. I always start with color correction, the foundation. That means making sure the color space is set correctly, exposure and luminance are balanced, white balance is technically neutral, and the image is grounded with basic contrast. Sometimes I'll also fix technical light ratio issues here if something is clearly off. Once the image is stable, I move into intentional light shaping. This is where I use contrast, often with curves, and masking to guide the viewers and give the image structure. Only then do I move into actual color grading. This is where I fine-tune hues, saturation, and color relationships. But now I'm doing it on top of something solid. And finally, if the image needs it, I move into look development and polish. For example, glow, halation, vignette, sharpening or blur, grain, all the finishing touches. I don't necessarily use every step on every shot, but having this framework allows flexibility without chaos. Here's the key. You don't need to memorize steps. You need to understand stages. Once the stages are clear, you can bend the rules intelligently. Remember, viewers don't see your note tree, they feel the image. And I want to share one last thing that helps my grading process a lot. Because our eyes adapt quite quickly, so sometimes a graded shot that feels perfect now can feel completely wrong tomorrow. Here's my simple trick. Grade your hero shot in 3 slightly different versions. Different saturation, different contrast, different separation, so you can compare them side by side, tune it, and make adjustments. This can remove guesswork and builds confidence. That's it. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.